Venri Chapter 21. Garrus. He attempted to sneak back into the med bay, but Karen was there now, and it wasn't as easy as sneaking out had been. Karen didn't look up. You're going to warp the matrix of that knee. You should be in bed. He sauntered back to his spot. I was. I kept weight-bearing load to its minimum based on research I did on the material. She gestured for him to let her examine his knee, which he did. She seemed satisfied. Perhaps you could be of some use after all. There's a tracking program on Morm's Omnitool. It appears the medication is working, except for, of course, an extended period of time not sleeping while you were missing. How is my other patient? Your other patient is more than fine. Liara also helped her with a... what do I call it? I don't even know. Brain whammy? Melding? I won't use the word bonding because it is personally offensive. That explains a great deal about the changes in her readings. So she's under the influence of an Asari therapist, a personally tailored medication, and Taurian bonding chemistry. It's a wonder she's still breathing. She does appear to almost stop sometimes, but she starts again. I can't calculate all the possible interactions with what's going on. I'm going to need a sample. Of her brain? I might object. Brain would be ideal, but blood, at least. Oh, I can get you blood. Uncontaminated. And now I'm personally offended again. Karen walked over to him and handed him a sample cartridge. Do me a favor and get me a sample of her blood under the influence. I don't really care how. Be imaginative. Be convincing. Kinky. You, on the other hand, I can get a sample from right now. She palmed another sample container to the side of his throat on unbroken skin. So since I'm unethical, you get to be unethical? I've always been unethical when it comes to my nearest and dearest patients who need me the most. Now I can flaunt it. As nearest and dearest adjacent? Thank you. You are as near and dear as they come. You're welcome. Changes in her readings. So you've been watching all along. I can neither confirm nor deny. Luckily, I believe you are good for her, or I would have had to do something about that. And as an also near and dear? I believe I have enough information over time to adequately model and monitor baselines and extremes. I am so glad you're on our side. You should be. I will allow you to leave if you clear it with me first, but if you stress that knee before it cures, I will replace it with something that doesn't match your plating, something in an unpleasant color, something with perhaps a concealed speaker in a vital location necessary for function, so if you remove it, you also won't be able to walk. You could get an educated opinion about Vorcha music at unpredictable intervals. Really kinky, Karen. I'm shocked. You will be if you test me further. Sit back. Let me check the reinforcement curing. Did you know Turian physiology allows me to look as though I were walking normally while keeping weight off the knee? I did, which is why you were allowed to leave in the first place, given your gait. He sat back dutifully. While we're being unethical, is there any way you could patch her readings into my Omnitool? I am in a position to act in ways you can't, with sufficient guilt in the form of a possibly discolored and loud knee to use as leverage. That could be arranged. If you burn me on this, even the Primarch will not save you. No burning, just a nice, warm sense of accomplishment. Excellent. By the time Garrus had finished recustomizing his visor interface to track Moram's sleep, stress, dehydration, nutrition, and electrolyte levels after Karen had explained their significance, he was smug as hell. Again, MSL, MST, MD, MN, and ME levels were unobtrusive in the overlay and color-coded to correspond with ranges. No need for him to be as discreet as Karen had been. He would be able to help Moram when she didn't know she needed help. He would be able to stress less about her state of mind when he couldn't see her, couldn't smell her, didn't know how she was due to distance. He imagined she'd be very good about sleep and food for a while, but old habits die hard, and he would be there to help her develop new ones. Hopefully without the loss of another joint, though he'd be fine with it. Maybe get one done in red, like Shepard colors. Yes, he had some control issues, as humans would put it. As a Taurian, the only issue he had was that he needed more control. He couldn't bring himself to feel sorry for any of it. Since he wasn't human, he couldn't be held responsible for their concerns. He imagined briefly being in command. He would just wants to say, "Shepard, get your ass behind fucking cover before I nail it there." That would be nice. Then, actually nailing her there regardless of outcome would be even better. He might have had to be nice to her, though. If he were in charge, respect her privacy, this was better. So much better. If he could wear this during sex and get access to that blood chemistry feedback, maybe he'd have gauges directly implanted into his other eye. He also thought of getting some red dye powder and rubbing it into his throat so it scarred over in a particular color, raised. A human habit, adding pigment. He should make it a Taurian tradition, a Clan Shepard tradition. They needed to establish them. Subtle, Vicarian. He smiled because he could call himself Shepard, and then gave himself a few moments to finish up fantasizing and being smug. He'd won. No doubt he'd won this one. Even the humans seemed to comprehend his marks of battle as points of pride. Between all the jokes and the ribbing, his food-bearing visitors had been gratifyingly supportive and understanding of his relationship with their commander. Even Javik had smirked appropriately on his way by through the glass, decidedly not bringing food. He turned his thoughts to the statistics coming from Palaven and engrossed himself in details, eyes flicking to her stats occasionally, reassuring himself when needed. He still wanted to go to her, but it became less about anxiety regarding her state of mind and body, and more about wanting to see her smile when she saw him. A few hours later, Moram dropped by with lunch for him. He drank in her smile and welcomed the food, having learned to refuse food otherwise. She'd stop feeding him if he was always full. He told her, "I need to get blood from you while we're having sex." "You do that all the time." "Sample blood." "A sample for whom?" Karen asked, concerned about triple whammy interactions. "You might feel a not sexy, but I'll try to keep it sexy pinch. Take your meds first." Kinky. Okay, I'm in. I have no idea what's going on in my head. If my blood helps. Kinky blood. Sure. Karen stared at him over Moram's shoulder, and he did a passable imitation of a human eyebrow waggle and smirk while Moram was setting up his food. This still qualified as being imaginative and convincing, as the truth wasn't what Karen had expected. It didn't hurt to reinforce that he did have power to influence Moram's behavior and decisions. He didn't need to be underhanded to do it, though he would still be underhanded. Karen would know he wouldn't betray her confidence, would be honest when possible, and could get her samples at will. Karen gave him another sample container. You too. May as well have the set, if everyone's being generous. Karen, I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner. Anything you need. Anything I need to know about care and feeding of my Taurian? Garrus chuckled. As with humans, try to get sufficient rest, nutrition, and hydration, and don't hit them. You can hit me. I'd also like a blood sample of yours. Now, I have previous samples, but this would also help isolate what influence Liara is having. Of course. As Karen took the sample, Moram said, We're coming up on the Citadel. Anything you need me to pick up for you? No, I'll be going to Huerta, arranging for a few things. I want to go. Need to talk to a few people. Okay if I take my guy out to dinner, or should he stay off the knee? By tomorrow, it should be fine. He doesn't appear to be in any pain. He was in pain. He wasn't going to look like he was, and if it became blinding, he had medication of his own. He was on medication right now because blinding was a good description. Karen phrased it that way deliberately, likely knew he was in pain, and did her best to maintain his confidence and cooperation. Any level of overt infirmity, such as the limp he should be having right now, would keep him in this bed and give Moram an excuse to leave him behind for him to convalesce. Unacceptable. He'd keep up the aura he'd developed after being hit with a rocket to the face. Unflappable Taurian. His nose was the worst, but it was less visible after the patch. Swelling was all under the plates. He didn't look like he was in pain, therefore he wouldn't be in pain. There was a crack in the paint along a fracture line of his nose, but he was keeping that, too. He hadn't redone his paint since being on the Normandy. He wouldn't in his lifetime. Each chip and crack and fade was a record of time spent in service to her. If he were ever to repaint, it would be in red. He wondered if Moram was aware of software that would fake vital signs. Karen would have considered that. He was going to have to learn these programs so he could do sweeps for new software on the subject. This was a whole new world of fun. 2 people lying about health, and 1 person who was going to go back to lying as soon as possible once concern died down. She was being contrite and cooperative, just as he was appearing to be. It would not last. Timeline. Priority, Citadel 2. Garrus. Moram had let him know that the Citadel was under attack. She'd activated James to accompany them. Garrus had asked her, No concerns about my health? You need to use your knee to shoot? No, ma'am. Would I get off the ship if I didn't take you? Not likely. Would you admit you were in pain if I asked? Also, not likely. So why are you asking? I'd like to hear your voice. She'd pulled him down by the front of his armor and kissed him. Then they'd loaded into the shuttle and seen the devastation by air. The violation he'd felt at the news that the Citadel was under attack by Cerberus was not business as usual. Every patch of ground he'd valued had been violated now. The Citadel had been attacked by Sovereign, the Normandy had been raided by the Collectors, Palaven was being assaulted by Reapers, and now the Citadel was under attack again by Cerberus. All 4 of those opponents had once been considered separate entities, and they were now one opponent. Cerberus had been insidious, and that had benefited them when they were a part of it. Now it was endorsing flat-out assault at the heart of the Citadel, cards finally on the table. No more lies about the good of humanity, no more pretense. Civilians dead, vital infrastructure for refugees shattered. Everything he'd done, particularly to keep Taurian refugees safe, to billet and provide for troops and wounded, was at risk, if not gone. He found it easier to be angry at Cerberus than the Reapers. These were people he knew, people he'd worked with. His helplessness transmuted into fury each step of the way. Thane had told them, Cerberus troops are everywhere, and they are in control of the docks. It was inexcusably stupid on their part that Cerberus had not dummied the Normandy into a berth, business as usual, and locked them down. They would have been confined. They should have been confined. Perhaps Moram was right about indoctrination forcing a lack of subtlety and strategy. They owed their lives to that oversight. After the grueling day was over, after he'd begun to process what had happened and what was left to do, he went looking for her. He'd done what he could to string communication together on the Citadel. She had her own meanings and consequences to deal with. Karen had been right. Moram was a certain way in battle. Heart rate elevated, but at a rate that wasn't dangerous. Not erratic. Stress levels continuous and pressured, but steady. Not dangerous to health or function. She must have gotten something to eat and drink along the way. His body was screaming from the pain, exhaustion making it rebound through him. He'd had to take medication to mute it somewhat. The elevator had been the worst, acceleration making it unpredictable how to protect his knee, and standing on one foot only and hovering the other one, made possible by Taurian hips and strength, was made impossible by acceleration and nemesises. Nemesi? He paused and looked it up. Nemesis. Fucking nemesis, he hated them. Everyone they'd encountered was dead. Karen had released him from care and assured the knee was in good shape, but he had been very careful. He did not want to hear Vorcha music. Now Moram's stress levels were climbing, something Karen also said was part of her pattern. Action was a release for her. Thought was more difficult. She used it to process, and the things she had to process were not easy things. Impossible things. Her method was less digesting or swallowing and more looking, analyzing. Less about feeling good about it, and more about understanding it. A never-ending pattern. There were times when he felt he could smell the smoke escaping from her ears. Her stress was still relatively muted after a day like today. Hopefully, Liara's measures were showing their worth. The most obvious places for her to be were the battery or their cabin or the CIC. She was in none of those places, and he didn't want to ask Edie. Edie was crew now, not a voice through an intercom. Edie would know, but Garrus wasn't going to ask her. He'd ping Moram first on her Omnitool. But not yet. He tried to think like Moram. He paused and shifted gears. And then he knew. The medbay. Karen was on the Citadel helping reorganize Huerta and aid Thane. The medbay was empty, and nobody would look for her there. If she'd gone to their cabin, it was possible Diana would try to get an interview. This way, it was enough out of character that everyone else would leave her alone. Except for him. At first he thought he was wrong when he got there. The lights were off. But he still trusted his hunch. The blinds were drawn. Hey. He followed the sound and her scent to the floor between two beds. She was leaning on the bed where he'd recently resided. He sat down next to her, elbows touching. Thane's in surgery. I wasn't allowed to stay. They will alert me when he's... I just thought... I found Kolyat and he's okay. He's there. He can give blood, and I'm useless. He trilled a consoling note, knowing not to tease her about uselessness. Not now. He pulled her sideways in his lap until she was leaning her neck against his arm, braced on his uninjured knee. His other hand was around her waist. She tilted her head back against his arm. Oh, Thane. I'm so sorry. He held his face solemn and still as she looked at him. It's my fault. It would have happened differently if... I can't even really explain how I know. Tell me what you know, and I can tell you what I know. Her head lifted up, her eyes sharp and wary. He could see lightning calculation happening. She knew, or she wouldn't have to count that high or that hard. His eyes gave her nothing except that she would have to give. He hid it. I know he hid it, and I know he hid it on purpose. Actions, though, those weren't hidden. I respect that he hid it, but... Siha. On the battlefield is where it wasn't hidden. You were always behind me, always on a target I gave you, or one that was targeting me. He was always between me and someone else. Never failed that when I had a moment to check, he was between me and a target. Even, or especially, when it would have been better for his own health for him to be behind a target instead. He would stand in front of a flamethrower, and he wouldn't get burned, which is why I never called him on it. He was never between you and someone else. That's why. I am going to kill Kai Lang with extreme prejudice, but I am so angry at Thane. 4 of us in that room, armed. It took a moment to get the Solarian Councilor to safety, and when you tried to target Kai Lang, Thane was in your way. He was in the fucking way. A lethal assassin. Someone who was never heard, never seen until someone else was dead. And he ran at him with a gun. Continued to move too fast to allow us to acquire the target. Ran at him with a gun, keeping me directly behind him. I could kill him myself. And you won't, because that's the death he chose. This quiet, contemplative man with the closed, labyrinthine mind chose to go out like a peacock. Oh, dance and flashing tail. For you. And I left him there, bleeding, run through. Kalahira, if he weren't already about to die, I would bring your son to your shores prematurely. He will be with you soon. Kalahira, I suspect you are a bitch. Amankira, grant me my revenge, and I will ask for no forgiveness. I am not Drell. I am united, body, mind, and soul, in this purpose. It is a good death, one I could ask for myself, in your service. I am beyond sick of good deaths. We are but men, Venri. You are his Siha, and you curse the gods while he tries to serve them. Serve you. It is his nature. Did you know? Yes. I had suspected since the Red Sand. He confirmed it recently. I always saw him on the battlefield as you described. I also know he allowed us, in our clumsy way, to make our path to each other while he cleared the way and did not put foot on that path himself. For you. He asked me not to tell you, but you already know. He even traveled to Earth while you were there, and would have been of as much assistance as he could be in your service. Ostensibly for his health, but there are so many other desert locations he could have chosen. Once again, the important factor, the justification for his actions, was you. He promised retribution if I failed you. He also granted his blessing and kinship. If you hadn't known, he would have told you if you tracked him down in the afterlife and asked him. Morm shook her head. Fuck. I know he doesn't want me to know. And I will honor that. I will grant him his good peacock death. Then when I find him and he's already dead, I'll kill him again. I told him you would find him. We should go together. I wished for him that Irika would be there waiting. Kolyat. I'd like to say I don't know how to do this, how to survive this, but I do. I'm gonna kill a lot of people in my grief, and it's gonna feel good. There we are agreed. How far away were you from shooting Caden? He pulled a gun on you, Morim. How far? If you hadn't signaled, he'd be dead. That boy. I don't know what to do with Caden. Udina made him a specter to gain himself a loyal dog. Caden doesn't understand fully that Udina would have handed him over to be a loyal, indoctrinated dog. If you'd been slightly more ruthless, Caden would have been your loyal dog. If I'd been slightly more ruthless, I'd have shot him myself. He's going to be on the ship now. His concerns about integrity make me nauseated. He says he'll never doubt me again. He'd doubt me if he saw on the news that I kicked a puppy. He'd demand that I present the puppy and proof that the boot mark didn't match my feet. If he were free in the world, that's what he'd do. Draw attention to presented morality, seek evidence. So why is he on the ship at all? I need him to see me in a puppy-free environment where he can see my boots at all times. Can you imagine him out in the worlds with Spectre status? He'd be in my way, or dead. Oh, shit. Thane is going to die, and now I have to babysit Caden. The loss is impossible, and the gain is just as impossible. The sense of trade is unbearable. There's an old Earth saying, I'd rather have Caden inside my tent pissing out than outside my tent pissing in. The damage that man can do while he fixates on the right thing is... I will wrap my head around it, but right now I want to kill them both. If Thane survives, I will lie to him on his deathbed, and he will lie to me. I will start over with Caden and try not to get him killed, or kill him myself. It's been a very long day. We're both alive. Why don't we just see if Thane and Caden will agree to fight to the death? My money's on Thane, even with the blood loss and the terminal illness and the hole in his chest. Garrus pressed his mouth to her temple. Mine too. Thane has made his choices. We will honor them. Caden has been beaten up so many times under your command that it's possible he'll just die tomorrow and spare you the trouble. You do know how to look on the bright side. We could let Javik beat him up in the bloodbath. I am there for that. We saved the Citadel. Again. Let the rest do what it's gonna do. Morden died for the Krogan. Thane was going to die. Now his death has more meaning than slowly being unable to breathe. Caden will follow you. He is loyal. You will turn him into something special by your example. Or tell me, and I punch him and shoot him for all the times he's deserved it. You may be sick of good deaths, but you inspire people, and you're going to have to live with letting people make their lives and deaths mean what they want them to mean. I wanted a Varen, not a Caden. It's okay. We'll get him trained. Point Caden at the Reapers and he'll do enough damage to make you proud. What if he's indoctrinated already? Udina could have... Then we shoot him. We're good at that. Morm sighed and shifted, moving to rest her head against his chest, his hand cradling her head, massaging her scalp, pulling her closer. He sat with her, measuring time through breaths, trying to be the solid, comforting presence she needed. When the notification came in that Thane was out of surgery, he went with her to Huerta. He waited outside while she went in to speak to Thane. He'd had his moments with Thane. He'd made his promises and given his assurances. They had all had enough time to come to terms with his death. Wasn't it better this way? To say goodbye in person, not to have him gasping for air while she was gone? For him to spend the last moments he had alive with the woman he loved? Morim would let him know if Garrus's presence was needed. Knowing Thane's restraint, knowing how little life he had left, he found himself almost rooting for them in that odd kinship way of knowing Thane loved her. Garrus had been the only person in this scenario allowed all the truths, able to speak freely. When she walked out, he opened his arms to her and she leaned against him. He's gone. His arms tightened and a stab of grief passed through him. A good death, he'd said. The reality of Thane's suffering before today struck him. He'd died slowly for years, grieving a wife, a son, a soul. He'd hungered for a woman he could not taste. This woman. Garrus's grief overwhelmed him, and his arms tightened around her, holding her while she cried. His arms and legs trembled, the pain in his body and the cumulative shocks of the day joining her in silent expression of loss. I promise you, Thane, I will not fail her. Please, spirits, guide me. Turian grief was a private thing. He'd grieved silently in the past. He'd grieved for her, he'd grieved for his family. This was different. Thane was an equal, if not superior, in tactics and ability. He'd never met Thane when he'd been at his peak performance. Those who hadn't lived to tell of it. Garrus longed for justice, but the horrific injustice of a child taken from parents and trained to be an assassin tore strips off him. The horror that Thane had overcome or failed to overcome, losing his wife in the process. He wanted to howl, but he kept the sound in his chest. He would not let it escape. Not here. Thane had never been rescued. Thane had not required Morim to drag him from a pit of his own making. Garrus was unbelievably lucky to have this woman in his arms, to have been rescued by her so often, to have the right to rescue her in return. He promised Thane, I will not fail you. He swallowed back his grief, rage, and fear with a deliberate breath and a swallow. He didn't need a readout to know she was tired, hungry, grieving, and barely managing to keep it together, just as he was. He waited until she'd stopped crying, then a few moments more. He tipped her chin up with a finger and said, How about you take your husband out for that dinner? Let's crash here. Get a hotel room, stay off the radar. Something must have escaped damage and still be open. She nodded gratefully. Yes, please. We did shut it down quickly, didn't we? Will you check on those places? I'll let Edie know I won't be available for... How long? A lifetime. Run away with me? Oh... That's what I want most. But 24 hours it is. He listened to Morim inform Edie. Please inform the crew that Thane Krios has died. I shall, Commander. I will miss him. I will miss him also. Garrus and I require rest. We will be unavailable for 24 hours. Omnitools offline and notifications not checked. I will not disable tracking. You'd be able to find us, but only you, Edie. Don't send anybody else, okay? Acknowledged and understood, Commander. You will not be disturbed. Thank you, Edie. He steered her out. I'll work on getting an extension to that 24 hours. Emergency aside, there are still places working. Let's go. I know where they are. When they exited the elevator, they were followed shortly after by a reporter. Huerta was off limits, but no doubt their presence had been leaked. Commander Shepard, a few questions, please? Morim stopped and put on her businesslike expression. No questions, please. I'm unable to make a statement at this time. The reporter brought the hovering camera in closer and didn't take the warning. Please, Commander Shepard, it's important. Garrus interrupted them by grabbing the camera by the front and crushing it between fingers until it fell to the floor, voyeuristic guts spilling out. Morim smiled more brightly. I believe you've heard my husband's comment. Have a nice day. Garrus made an attempt at a smile. It wasn't that hard. Crushing the camera had felt good. The reporter kept his mouth shut, which was a wise reading of the circumstances. Garrus would have liked to hit someone right about now. His grief tended to transmute its way to anger quickly, and he had a lot of grief to spare. They made their way quietly to the restaurant. He looked at the menu and asked her, "Okay with you?" "Looks good. A lot of this. I have no idea. Braised ginkgo farce." "That sounds made up." "It is. I just thought it sounded funny in my head. I'm gonna pick one. The farther from Earth I get, the less I expect Earth food. It's mostly Asari." "Do you like Asari food?" "More than Turian, I bet." It wasn't all that reassuring, but he didn't want to drag her from place to place until she found something she recognized. He hoped Asari food was good enough. The Turian food looked good enough. At this point, they could probably just suck on nutritional rocks. The food was not the main point here. It was just helpful to behave for a few moments as though they could afford to look like normal people. You know, a bonded Turian and human having a meal they couldn't share. She ordered the fillet of some sort of Asari animal and a vegetable. He had no idea what it was. He ordered a Turian fish dish, one he hadn't had since he was here working for CSEC. The Citadel had its own food culture, and you couldn't find a lot of it off-world. Everything was farmed here, and that created a distinct flavor. Some places tried to stay authentic and pretend they had imported enough Palavan soil to grow things, but over years that tradition had faded. Over time, Turians became accustomed to the Citadel and gained enough experience that they didn't insist on authenticity any longer. Because it was mostly a lie. Things were grown in hydroponics complexes. He'd been on a ship so long that food anywhere that didn't come directly from a pouch was a luxury, and he and Morim were not going to complain. He asked her, "How was he? What did he say?" She closed her eyes. "He prayed for me. Prayers for the wicked must not be forsaken." Garrus nodded. The first words he'd spoken in her presence would be like the last. "Koyat was there?" "I'm sorry I didn't get to say goodbye, but I'm glad you did." "I am not a Siha." "You were to him. You're my Bakan. You're a pro at accepting insults. Why are compliments so hard?" She chewed for a moment, giving herself time to think, and he went back to eating, wondering if she'd address the question or let it slide. "Perhaps more clearly stated? I don't want to be a Siha." "That's more honest, at least. That is partly why he didn't want to tell you." "What is partly why?" "This thing you do where you refuse to acknowledge you are larger than life? We know life, Morim. We know relative sizes." "We who?" "Me. Thane. Caden. Liara. Those are the most obvious, but there are more." "You want me to sleep with all of them?" "No, I won. Possibly not fair, possibly not square, but I won. That doesn't mean I can't sympathize with those who lost, and they did lose, Morim. You can't take it from them by pretending they didn't see you as you were. This isn't a win-win scenario. That is why what Thane knew about you made him unique." "What did he know? What do you know that he knew? Maybe I made a mistake." Yeah, maybe you did. This is about Thane, the actual man. Yes, he hid it from you, but I can tell you. I should tell you. He knew that you'd try to minimize how he felt because you couldn't give it to him. That you'd want to give it to him on the basis of the strength of how much he was willing to give you in return. Everything. I already had everything. And he knew it. That's why I'm still alive. You think I don't appreciate that? Thane threatened you? No, he didn't threaten me. I just came to eventually learn that if I weren't good enough, and you persisted in the mistake of being involved with me, he would have killed me to get to you. Isn't that a little dramatic? No. Take it from the men who guarded your life with their own and would have given it. Did give it. How did I ever sleep on that ship, I wonder? You didn't. You had nightmares. Yeah, I did. I'm sorry if I'm minimizing. There's a Turian custom, giving voice to the thoughts of the dead. Do humans do that? No, I imagine Drell don't need to, remembering every word. He loved you, Venri. I am certain he loved you until his bones shook with it. You speak for Thane? Someone should. Do you propose to fuck for Thane, too? He whistled low and looked at her with accusation. Oh, come on, that was a joke. Yeah, that might be a problem, that joke. Forget I said it. I'm just trying to keep up with a bizarre conversation. You don't know Turian customs at all. So teach me. He looked at her, thoughts swirling and possibilities. The possibilities of speaking for the dead. Not only was he insulted, he was insulted on Thane's behalf. I don't like that look. I don't like having to give that look. Are you done? I'm not sure I feel safe leaving the restaurant without an escort. How much about today has been about safe? Well, I thought maybe dinner. Then you're as safe as you can be in my presence, Siha. She closed her eyes with a grimace. That's really weird. Can I take back anything that I said and start over? You could try. I'm assuming you're going to let me out of the restaurant before you yell at me? That would be ideal. No yelling, I promise. Yeah. All right. It's been a weird day. Let's go have a weird night. He escorted her out with his hand at her back. I can benefit from your willingness to walk right into things. It's charming. Oh, fine. I deserve whatever, I'm sure. Explain it to me. I'll listen. They walked with his guidance toward the hotel. It wasn't far. She didn't try to converse. She wasn't angry either, just dispirited, tired, grieving. Of course it was going to lead to sex for him. Stress. This is how Turians dealt with stress. Speaking for the dead was an excuse, but it fit and it burned. His hand remained on her back as they walked. 2 human men were walking toward them. Moram was oblivious and silent, the expression on her face making clear that she had turned in, she wasn't watching, dependent on his arm to guide her. His eyes followed the men as they both looked at her and ignored him. When they were out of sound range for a human, but not a Turian, one of them said, I'd like to fuck her until she screamed. He swiveled his head to see them, and one of them was laughing. Different voice, so he knew which one had said it. He didn't care, but it was information. He left her and sped toward them, grabbed each one by the throat, and slammed them up against the ceiling-high advertisement displays until he saw cracks in the polymer. Now that he had them here, he had no idea what he wanted to do other than kill them. He had them both by the throat, outside fingers wrapped around necks and one finger with an extended claw drawing blood in the center of their throats to restrain them from struggling. He let out the sound he'd been holding tight in his chest since Huerta, grief and fury. They were terrified, and he didn't think they knew why he'd done it, but they dissolved into apologies and fear, begging to be released. He calmly listened, then looked at one until his eyes dropped, then looked at the other. He told them, "That is my wife. Your hopes of fucking her are offensive. Taurians can hear you. Keep your future wishes to yourself." He dropped them to the ground and they ran away. That felt really good. He walked back over to her. She hadn't done anything other than to turn around to watch. Assholes? Assholes. Feel better? Yes. Good. She leaned up and kissed him on his mandible, pressing in just a little until it flexed slightly from the pressure. Spirits, she felt good. She smelled good. If you don't stop, you'll be the next one up against that wall. I will draw reporters. She pulled back and smiled at him. All right. Lead on. So far, maybe going back to the Normandy would have been better. But not as entertaining. They got there and checked in, thinking that after their day, they'd be lucky to get out of here without more assault in the morning. Maybe CSEC would try to arrest him. Maybe more reporters. That last was the most likely. The part of him ready for a fight would be fine shooting his way out of here in the morning, as long as he didn't have to walk any further right now because he could put his hands on her body. Too many things were pulling on his thoughts. Grief. He wanted to illustrate something about grief. He didn't doubt she understood grief. He couldn't get it straight in his head, and his body was screaming with pain and need and grief. He tried to focus on the order of things. Given time, he could work through everything he was thinking, but for now... He walked to her and deliberately did not touch her, brought his mouth to her ear as he stood behind her and asked her, "Does my voice sound different to you between now and before? Did it change after I bonded to you, or is it the same?" Her heart sped up and he smiled. He thought he knew the answer. She tried to back up to lean against him, but he wouldn't let her, and she stood still, her hands clenched at her sides. You sound the same. I've always loved your voice. So it couldn't get any better for you, could it? Even with bonding? No, it couldn't get any better. I wonder sometimes about something Thane said. Something about meeting you first. What do you think would have happened? I hadn't thought. Garrus, this is a little weird, don't you think? It's a lot weird. I still claim the right to speak for the dead. For a brother. What do you think would have happened? If he'd met me, when? Let's put him in place of me. I really don't like that idea. Humor me. He would have been an excellent crew member, and he would have been conscious at all times. I'd owe him my life. That wouldn't make him unique. No, it wouldn't. He'd be an assassin with no personal responsibility for his targets. He'd have abandoned his wife and his son. He'd be ill. Yes, all of those things. What if he lied to you, Siha? What if he didn't tell you about any of those vulnerabilities? What if he were strong for you, there for you, lied to you to get to you? He'd have had to lie. Would you have seen it? I really don't know. Without you there, if he'd lied, if I hadn't caught on, you would have caught on. I know you would have. The more I think about it, the more I know. He'd never be loved by the woman in front of me. But with how much he genuinely loved you, would you have let him believe you loved him back? Slept with him that last night before the collectors? If he'd saved your life, if you'd never died, if he'd guarded you every moment of every day with his body? I really don't know. I do. The only way he'd ever have you is if I'd never been there at all. Not if he'd met you first. Because you love my voice and the things I say. You'd have let him touch you because he wanted to touch you so much it would hurt. And you wouldn't want him to hurt. But I promise him, Bakan, you'd never want to touch him as much as you want to touch me. Could we, please, get to the touching part? Insanity is not off the table, Garrus. Insanity is standing right behind you, Moram. He never even got to call me that, and you have 5 names for me. No, he never did. I will mourn for him, and I will grieve for what he could never have had, but you are mine. Yes. I won't accept even theoretical times or places where someone else gets to touch you, even from a man I love and would have died for willingly. I speak for him, but I also speak for me. He would have liked to take the clothes off you, but I prefer to be able to do it this way. Take them off. For me. Do it for me, Bakan. She was always relieved to be able to act, and she did so with gratifying ease and fire in her eyes. She turned and stepped back from him, slowly and deliberately removed each fastening with respect, not for the reverence she held for her own body, but for how she knew he felt. With just his voice, something he'd always had, not relying on bonding chemistry. Something she responded to until she trembled. Her nipples were hard and he could smell arousal. She knew what she could do to him. He kept his cock behind plates, though it strained to reach for her. When she was done, he told her, "Lie back on the bed for me." She gave him a smile. Oh, that smile. And did as he'd asked, with a teasing ease that made him press harder at the restraining plates. She'd crossed her ankles lightly and was looking at the ceiling as though he weren't in the room at all. He was going to wreck her composure. He lay down next to her and brought his mouth to her ear again. She tilted it his way. Need to stroke at her collarbones and her cheeks itched on his hands until he clenched them. Instead, he told her, "There's something Drell can do. Something humans can do that I can't do. I've only seen you try once, and I stopped you. Your hands went to your clit while I was teasing you. Touch yourself, Bakan. I want to watch. I want to see. Can you imagine how many times your image has been brought to mind while people masturbate to you? I can't do it. If I'm without you, I have nothing. I'll find no pleasure unless it's with your body, Bakan. But I want you to show me what I can't have, what you can do. He watched her as one of her hands slipped between her legs. He couldn't see, so he told her. Wider, Bakan. Open your legs. Bend your knees. I want to see. She did that for him, and he was, if anything, again, tearingly jealous at the idea that pleasure could be gained this selfishly, this reliably. Her other hand came to pinch at her nipple, palming her breast and pressing. Her eyes were closed and her head thrown back. His breathing was labored, and he talked low in her ear, watching her, feeling the twitches and straining muscles of her body through the mattress. He gave her his voice. That's all she needed. Her imagination would allow her to do this if he weren't with her. He asked her, "Did you think of me when you left me, Bakan? Did you lie in bed at night and strain with your mind and your fingertips to remember what it was like to be touched?" She nodded quickly. Yes. Did you listen to my voice? Recordings of me? She shook her head and bit her lip, and he was surprised. Really, Bakan? You wouldn't lie to me right now, would you? She shook her head again. Couldn't listen to your voice. Wouldn't talk to you. Knew I'd run back to you. He watched her pant and heave, flame kindling in his spine. He growled in her ear to let her hear how much that pleased him. She answered with an arch to her spine and trembling in her thighs. He leaned close enough that he was almost touching her ear. Show some respect, Moram, to the men, the people who ache for you, who may take their trembling bodies in their own hands because they won't have your hands. You are a Siha. You are a Bakan. You are that woman to the people who can't even walk by you without commenting. I wanted to kill those two men because they said they wanted to fuck you until you screamed. They don't get to think that because you are mine. Only I get to fuck you until you scream. You are mine, you bear my marks, and others can have your pale shadow in their dreams, but only I get to make you come with my voice. They want you, but you want me. No reverie, no touch, no scent. She was undone, and it was with just his voice and her need for him. She panted with breathy moans until she tipped over into spasms and waves of rhythmic sound when she came. It was still impossible to imagine how that would feel. She was beyond herself, and he gently touched her collarbone and cheekbone while she turned to him. He stood and listened to her whimper as he left the bed, slowly took off his own clothes. He walked to the foot of the bed and pulled her to him, lifting her hips with his hands and driving down, fully into her. She screamed for him, the pain of sudden invasion apparent in the sound. She loved the rending, and she pressed her hands down to give her the angle to lift her hips to him more fully, to embrace each thrust he gave to her, her welcome hunger pulling at him. The pain and the grief and the lust and the love lost their edges and blended together in reverie, in union with this strange woman who faced the light and acknowledged no shadow. He lifted her from the bed and had her body against his while her arms came around him when she was able to touch him. Finally. She bit at her own lip and then bit at his tongue until he tasted them together, his arms coming around her more tightly, and her hand coming around to press at his fringe, to trace the lines of her kinril. They'd survived another day. More horrors. Together. And his body finally accepted that they were still alive, still together, still one. And then she knew no threat would reach her while he drew breath.